Welcome back, everybody, to a very special crossover edition of the Junkyard Dawgcast, as well as the Irish Illustrated Insider. I am the host of the Junkyard Dawgcast, Jordan Hill. We got Tim Prister from Irish Illustrated with us on this morning to talk a little bit about the upcoming Sugar Bowl, getting ready for the Georgia Bulldogs and the Notre Dame Fighting Irish to duke it out down in New Orleans. For a chance to move on to the college football playoff semifinals. So we're going to take this episode to learn a little bit about the Bulldogs, learn about the Fighting Irish, and get a feel for how this game is going to go down in the Superdome. So, Tim, how's it going for you this morning? We're recording this right before the holidays. How is everything treating you?
Doing well, Jordan. Looking forward to, Notre Dame, Georgia, two of the bedrocks of college football. So always great. Notre Dame hasn't played in the Sugar Bowl in 18 years. I was a much younger man back then. So looking forward going back to the Big Easy.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a good time right around New Year's. It should be make for a very fun trip for both sides. And Tim and I are going to kind of bounce back and forth so the folks listening to both these podcasts can kind of learn about the opponent. And I want to start with you, Tim, and going back to that first round game for Notre Dame, 27-17 win over Indiana. Honestly, wasn't really that close until I guess maybe the last 2 minutes. But what stood out to you from that Notre Dame win? What impressed you the most about what the Fighting Irish accomplished in that game?
Well, going into the game, it was all about, can Notre Dame impose its will on them physically? And you would expect them to, because they have a bunch of 4.5 stars, Notre Dame that is, and Indiana has a bunch of 3 stars and guys from James Madison. So it played out that way. And credit to Indiana for hanging tough and keep battling. But it was 27-3. When the score was 27-3, that was more reflective of the game. And I've had a couple of associates we've done, like you, Jordan, I'm sure podcast after podcast. And, I think Indiana defensively did a really nice job to hang in there, to stay in the game. I guess the game was already kind of out of reach, but it could have been, if Notre Dame takes advantage of its opportunities. For example, their first 2 possessions in the second half start at the Indiana 43. Well, if they follow through with those, the game gets up into the 30s and 40s. And so Indiana hung tough defensively, but offensively, the Notre Dame defense is great. I mean, there's just no other way to say it. It's a great defense, and they impose their will on the offense that Indiana put out there.
Yeah, it was impressive. I know there were a lot of Georgia fans watching that one, knowing that they would get the winner. But coming out of that game, as we record this a few days ahead of everybody getting down to New Orleans, what's sort of the health status of this team for Notre Dame? Does anything kind of stand out to you as very notable as far as the injury situation for this team?
Yeah, well, since you and I did the CBS hit the other day, and we were talking about, of course, we were talking about Carson Beck, whether he would play or not, and now we know for sure that he won't. Well, we went to the Monday press conference with Marcus Freeman, expecting him to say that Riley Mills, Notre Dame's big, strong, agile quarterback pressuring defensive tackle, would maybe be questionable, and then he said he's out not only out for the Georgia game, but even if Notre Dame were to get by Georgia, out for the rest of the playoffs. And that's just a massive blow, because you add it to Boubacar Traore, Notre Dame's top pass rushing defensive end, already being out. Jordan Botelho, their other pass rushing defensive end, already being out. So you've lost 3 of your 4 best players up front. They still have Howard Cross III, but that's significant. And I think that, all things being equal, I think that Notre Dame can still play competitively with Georgia. But then when we talk about, playing 3 more games without Riley Mills at defensive tackle, I think it really, really diminishes Notre Dame's chances, certainly against Georgia, but especially, if you go down the road and if they were fortunate enough to get to the national title game, it's pretty tough. It's pretty difficult to win these 3 games without a guy of Riley Mills' stature.
With him out, is there a guy, maybe a couple of guys that's like, okay, they will probably step up in his place?
Yeah, Gabe Rubio is a guy of comparable size, much less experience, a guy that looks like he has a chance to be pretty good next year. But the thing is, then, as we said our podcast, and you need a Gabe Rubio for Gabe Rubio, and you're really not in a position to dip to your third guy. And Rubio was injured early in the year, so he doesn't have the stamina to play 60 snaps, or he hasn't been asked to play 60 snaps. So that's difficult. And then, you look at Howard Cross III is an excellent nose tackle for Notre Dame, but he's undersized. He does it with quickness. And I've been watching that Georgia offensive line, and I have some questions for you because I'm a little perplexed about the run game, why it isn't better. Maybe it's more of a lack of emphasis on it. But when I watch the Georgia offensive line pass block, I love their length. And it looks like Notre Dame's going to, especially without Mills, who's a pass rushing defensive tackle. Big, strong guy, but he can also pass rush. So I'm wondering how Notre Dame exactly is going to get a pass rush. Al Golden is a great defensive coordinator, and he schemes stuff up. But when I watch the cat and mouse game that Georgia offensive line plays when they're pass blocking, it's going to be pretty tough for Notre Dame.
Yeah, it's been something, Tim, that's kind of been hard to wrap your head around watching this team. The offensive line, I think they've been great in pass protection, and I want to say they're in the top 10 last I looked as far as sacks allowed to this point in the season. But it's just the run blocking is very inconsistent, and I think that guys like Trevor Etienne, the lead back, deserve a lot of credit for the plays they've made, because I feel like as many explosive plays as Trevor's delivered, as productive as he's been, I think his greatest asset this season has been turning what should be about a 2-yard gain into like a 6-yard gain. And, you probably lose sight of that over the course of a game, but it adds up. It keeps drives alive. Yeah, and I think, a piece of it has been injuries. They have had to kind of rotate on the offensive line. I think they're in a pretty good spot right now, trying to get Ernest Green back to full health. He was the starting left tackle. He had been dealing with a shoulder injury, but I think he's in a pretty good spot to at least rotate in when Monroe Freeling in that game in New Orleans. But yeah, I think that's been one of there's several parts of this Georgia team, Tim, where it's just sort of hard to kind of wrap your head around why they're not more productive. The other example I would say is like the wide receivers. They've struggled with drops this year. But the offensive line, they have a very talented group once again. Veteran offensive line coach and Stacey Searles there. But great in pass pro, and then you kind of are hit and miss, it seems like, most of the time with running the ball, which makes this game to me very interesting, because I think the game plan is going to be, let's try to take as much off Gunner Stockton as we can,
right.
Try to let those guys run the ball, really, put the emphasis on Trevor Etienne and company. It does get easier, like you said, with Notre Dame losing a huge piece on the defensive line, but it's not going to be easy by any means.
Well, and Etienne is an Etienne, for the family of Etiennes, and he's very good. He's got some pop. I've been really impressed with the quickness of Nate Frazier. And, I wanted to say something to you from the other day, again, when we did that hit with CBS. I felt like when we finished, I felt like I made it sound like, well, since Gunner Stockton is going to be the quarterback, that they're not going to be able to throw the football. I know that this is a guy that, a 4-star player, threw for almost 14,000 yards in high school, agile, good athlete. I know he's capable of throwing the football, but I think you understand where I was coming from, that, going up against Al Golden, there was a great talk about Curtis Rourke and what he had done for Indiana this year, 70%, this and that. And he looked very, very average against an Al Golden coach team. So that's kind of that's Notre Dame's perspective, that, we want to see the young guy. And I realize there's frustration with Carson Beck and the interceptions. He's also thrown a ton of passes, so that's going to raise your number up a little bit. He's had some bad interceptions. I've seen those on film, there's no doubt. But I'm interested to see Gunner Stockton, especially if Kirby Smart wants to run the football a little bit more. He probably gets him involved to help loosen things up a little bit. But I wanted to make that clear, that it's not like I don't think Gunner Stockton's capable, because I know he is. But all things being equal, the opponent would always rather play the more inexperienced guy, of course.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. And I think a lot of Georgia fans would agree with you that, it's like, okay, let's see what Gunner can do, because, there was never really a competition with Carson Beck this year in terms of starting again. It was very clear Carson was going to be the starter. If you compared those two, you would say, yeah, Gunner is the better athlete between the two, but Carson's got the bigger arm. Carson can make more of the throws. And, I think that, Gunner didn't throw a ton in the second half of that SEC title game, but I give Mike Bobo a lot of credit. I mean, I thought that they did a very good job of trying to play to his strengths, getting him moving on, bootlegs and trying to utilize. I mean, the penultimate play in that game, he takes off on a draw and he gets leveled.
Oh, my God, did he take a hit? I wondered how he was in the week after that game.
Kirby said he could have gone back in afterwards.
Right?
Now, that's what he said. I don't know if he was being completely honest. I will say this, though, watching it back, I usually do a rewatch story in the days following the game. And, I mean, he popped up a lot quicker than I think most people would have after a hit like that. But, no, I mean, I think, Tim, that if you're Notre Dame, I think the way you win this game is to try to make Georgia as one-dimensional as possible and say, okay, Trevor Etienne may be getting 3-yard, 4-yard runs, but we have to put it on Gunner Stockton. And, I do think he deserves credit for how he played in that SEC title game, but this is a whole game. And now, I'm sure Texas didn't put a lot of prep in seeing Gunner Stockton in that game. And Notre Dame's known, now for a few weeks that more than likely it's going to be Gunner. And as Marcus Freeman, I saw on Monday, explain that they watched some of the plays he was in and got a feel for him. It's not going to be a surprise, that is to say, with Gunner Stockton being out there this time.
No, when he started his press conference, he didn't even consider the possibility of Beck playing. And then, of course, that announcement came a couple days later, I guess it is. But it's interesting, Jordan, that I mean, both teams like the blitz a lot, but the Georgia linebackers are attacking the line of scrimmage, and Notre Dame does the same thing, and they put a lot of pressure on the quarterback, but that's where my concern is with that size. And that's when I say size, what I really mean is the length of the Georgia offensive line. Can those linebackers get home? Can Howard Cross be effective as an undersized nose tackle? You really, from a Notre Dame perspective, you wonder about that. Now, the flip side for Notre Dame is that, teams have blitzed Riley Leonard, and Riley Leonard just generally runs away from them and does a really good job. He hasn't been sacked a whole lot. I think what opponents have found is that when he does decide to run and then faces somebody from the second level, he's generally he's faster than linebackers. Now, that may be the exception to the rule at Georgia, but he has been able to, generally when he decides to run, it is a successful play. So, and then, you throw that in with the combination of Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price, and you truly do have three guys that are, basically 7 yards per carry guys. So that's and Notre Dame needs that because they are not a prolific throwing football team. That their success throwing the football is derived off of their success running the football. Riley Leonard's not a guy that they're going to want to send, throw 37 times. He's not going to throw anything like what Beck did. And I'm interested to see how much Stockton ends up throwing in this game. What do you think about that?
I think they're going to do their best to not have Gunner throw a ton. I think that they understand that. I mean, one, I do think he's capable, but I mean, this is going to be his first start.
And this is a great secondary, and this is what's amazing about Notre Dame secondary. It's a great secondary without All-American Benjamin Morrison. He was injured, and they put Leonard Moore in as a freshman, which we knew that they liked him. Leonard Moore is as good as Benjamin Morrison. It's an incredible development. And we wouldn't have seen that if Morrison hadn't gotten hurt, but Leonard Moore would have played more and more and would have been effective. But a young quarterback going against this secondary, it's the kind of matchup that, that's the matchup that Notre Dame wants. Stockton's very talented, but it's going to be a mind game. That's going to be the big challenge. He's going to see things that he hasn't seen before.
For sure. And I am interested, Tim, you hit on Riley Leonard. I'm fascinated just to see what he's able to do against Georgia. And there's kind of two pieces to this. One, when you look at Georgia, the times they have struggled, the games they have lost, not only this year, but really since Kirby Smart's been the head coach, it's against mobile quarterbacks. It's guys that can extend plays. It's guys who, can either scramble or just move around to keep plays alive. And I think Riley Leonard's very capable of doing that. Now, at the same time, you talked about that athleticism with these Georgia linebackers. We're talking about Jalen Walker, who won the Buckus Award, who
he's spectacular. I've seen a bunch of them now. He's spectacular.
He's just, I think he's a first-round pick. I think he's a guy that has a very bright future as far as the NFL. And having Smile Munden, who's a senior, who's played a whole lot of football, even two of the younger guys, CJ Allen, who's a sophomore, and then Raylan Wilson, who's also a sophomore. Raylan hasn't played quite as much, but I feel like in his second year, especially in probably the last month, maybe month and change, you're starting to see it flash, and you're starting to see him make plays. So, to me, that Riley Leonard piece of it is just very interesting how Georgia plays him. And I did want to get your thoughts too, Tim, on this Notre Dame run game, more so the running backs. I mean, I thought they were spectacular in that game against Indiana, and how Georgia tries to slow them down is going to be a big piece of this, because we go back to that SEC title game. Texas had so much momentum going into that game as far as very successful running the football, leaning on that, having big plays. And for the second time this season, Georgia just completely shut down Texas. So what do you think about Notre Dame's run game, particularly with the running backs, and if they can go up against this Georgia defense and move the ball, maybe not quite as successfully as they did against Indiana, but enough to be productive and for it to matter in this game?
Well, first of all, like if you look at the Indiana Notre Dame game, and I am talking about Riley Leonard, how he kills you with his feet. I don't think there's any doubt that Mike Denbrock, the offensive coordinator, said, you know what, we're not going to run him unless we have to. And like the first quarter, he barely even ran. A little bit later in the game, actually, when they needed him a little bit less, he did run a little bit, but ultimately he ran 9 times. I would expect he's going to have to run a lot more than that against Georgia. And that's number one. Number two, I've been doing this 43 years, and I grew up in South Bend, so I've seen Notre Dame running backs. I have memories of Notre Dame running backs for almost 60 years, and I've seen some great ones, but I don't know if there is one that's been the most complete back that Jeremiah Love is, and he has added the physicality component that he really didn't have last year as a freshman, and he definitely didn't have in high school. I remember watching his high school film thinking, is that all you're going to do? You're just going to run. You're never going to go between the tackles. You're going to run around the edge. And we were actually talking about that with him last week, and adding the physicality component. And he said, well, I didn't need to run people over in high school. I just ran around them. But Notre Dame has a new strength and conditioning coach this year, and I don't think he gets enough credit for Jeremiah Love's absolute. He can run people over, and that was not a part of his game last year. So it's that blazing speed, as we saw. It looked like the Indiana cornerback D'Angelo Pons might catch up, but that has happened at least not 98 yarders, but long runs at least half a dozen times this year where you think, oh, maybe that guy might catch up. And Jeremiah Love, even after the game, said, I knew he wasn't going to catch me. So he's brilliant. He's brilliant. And Price is a number 2. Jadarian Price is a number 2, who I think a couple of years ago they expected would be a number 1 at this point, but he had an Achilles injury. He's very good too. His lateral quickness, when he gets through the first wave of defenders at the line, and then he squares up with a linebacker, he's used that lateral quickness to run around him. Most memorably against Texas A&M in the opening game of the season. Now, again, a lot more difficult against the Georgia linebackers, and I think we all recognize that. But it's a really good duo, and really they have a third guy, Aeneas Williams, who's a freshman, who earned playing time first and foremost with his pass protection. And now they throw the football to him, and he's been good in short yardage situations too. But it'll be mainly those two and Leonard, and I would expect that you're going to see Leonard run the football more than you did against Indiana, because they just figured not only did they not need him, but that just meant less hits on his body. So it's a three-pronged attack. Can they run against Georgia? I saw those Texas games. I know exactly what you're talking about, and that's a challenge because if I'm Georgia, I'm saying, okay, Notre Dame, you want to beat us with Riley Leonard throwing the football, you go right ahead and see if you can do that. If the Notre Dame running game is stifled, it's game over.
Yeah, I'm fascinated to see that matchup, especially because one of the reasons I thought Texas had a chance to, I didn't think they were going to run for like 300, but that they would move the ball pretty well on the ground was Christian Miller, one of Georgia's best run stuffers, didn't play in that game. Now, good news
is he back? He's going to be back for this year. Yeah.
That's the expectation. He's been back at practice. He's been working. I do think he's going to play, and I think that's going to be huge for Georgia in this matchup. I did want to ask you, Tim, before we throw to a break, because like you mentioned, how much experience you have watching Notre Dame football. Where do you feel like this team as a whole is as far as the best Notre Dame teams you've watched? As a complete team, where do they rank from what you've seen to this point?
Well, it's certainly one of the great defenses in Notre Dame history, and they've had some good ones. Before El Golden, they had Marcus Freeman as their defensive coordinator. Before Marcus Freeman, they had Clark Lee as their defensive coordinator. So they've been really good for quite some time at the end of the Brian Kelly era, right into Marcus Freeman. I think defensively it's as good as it gets. 2012 when they played in the national championship and were no match for Alabama, that was a great defense too. There's been some. I can go back to 1988. Clearly, when they dominated West Virginia in a national title game with that great defense. 2002 was a very underrated defense. Complete. Well, like if you say great defense and great running game, it's about as complete as it gets. Now they've had passing games certainly more complete. Brady Quinn in 2005, 2006 was a different dimension. Charlie Weiss is a head coach. He had just come from the NFL. And so he had placed a greater emphasis on the passing game. Marcus Freeman came in and said, we're going to be an offensive line, defensive line driven program, which as an old timer, I like to hear that because, the greatest era during my 43 years, of course, was with Lou Holtz. And it was a different time then, so much now is formations and schemes and deception. And with Lou Holtz, you just lined up, we're going to kick your ass. And they could win that way. You can't win that way now, at least not on a grand scale. You have to, not that they weren't quick, but you have to have a little bit more speed and a little bit more diversity to your game. But it's a great defensive team. It's a great running team. I don't know that certainly the passing game isn't up to the level of some of the other ones, but this is in 43 years. Well, you know what? I'll let you know after next Wednesday, because if Notre Dame wins that game, Notre Dame has had great difficulty winning major bowls. They really haven't won a major bowl since 1993, which is a real sore spot. Can you count Indiana as a major bowl? No, because they're an upstart. A win over Georgia would be something that this program hasn't accomplished in quite some time.
Right. And I think, that's something that I think they're fully capable of doing. And it's going to be a fun game to watch. I'm excited. I was going to bring up, you mentioned, how Marcus Freeman has really worked to build on the lines. And, going back to like the Lou Holtz era, Kirby Smart was talking about sort of the way the game has changed. This was earlier in the season. And he said, so much of offense now is pre-snap motion and deception. He said, we used to just line it up and you just tried to, knock the hell out of the guy across from you. So I thought that was worth mentioning because Kirby was talking about that earlier in the year.
He's been around too. He's seen the evolution of the game, no doubt.
No doubt about it. Well, we will take a quick break, come back, and talk more specifically about this matchup in the Superdome, what each team needs to do, and maybe throw out a few predictions as well. All right, Tim, we were recording this a few days before we really get into New Orleans and have a chance to do the big media day that'll really tell us a little bit more about what both of these teams are kind of thinking and the just sort of their mentality going into this game. But we've each gotten a chance to hear from the head coaches of our teams in the lead up to this one. Did anything kind of stand out to you about what Marcus Freeman had to say to start this week as far as getting ready for this game, what they're going to be up against Georgia?
I don't. Well, when he said Riley Mills was out for the rest of the playoffs, that was a surprise. We weren't anticipating that. But I'm trying to think, Jordan. I don't know necessarily anything that really stands out. He has really grown into this role. When you win 11 games in a row, I guess it's easy to say that, but I think we've seen him. He lost the first 3 games that he coached at Notre Dame. He took over for Brian Kelly against Oklahoma State in the bowl game and lost that, and then lost to his alma mater in his first regular season game at Ohio State, where he played, and then lost at home to Marshall. So it was a disaster. But he's grown into it. If you just looked at his sideline demeanor, you would see a big difference. But I think he's really matured, and he's really gotten the attention of this football team. I think they really respect him. I think they really want to play for him. He's really brought out the pride in Notre Dame football. Not that there wasn't pride with Brian Kelly, but just he really gets the magnitude that is Notre Dame football because of its tradition. And so he's gotten better and better. He's a riverboat gambler when it comes to his special teams. I actually asked him about that on Monday. It's like, when you were named head coach, were you thinking, man, I'm going to do all this stuff with special teams? Or did he had a great special teams coach, Brian Mason, when he came in, and Mason immediately went to the Indianapolis Colts. That's how good he was. And then now he has Marty Biaggi, and they do a lot of exotic things in the special teams. So he goes for it, man. I mean, the game's on the line, the season's on the line, and he goes for it. At USC, he faked a punt in a tie game at his own 29 or something ridiculous. He just goes for it. So, I think if Georgia has to be prepared for anything, it's the unexpected with Marcus Freeman, because he'll go for it.
Yeah, and Georgia's coming off a game that I truly think they won because they faked a punt after Carson had gotten hurt. That was a gutsy play. I did want to read part of this quote. Kirby Smart was asked about Marcus Freeman, because you kind of look at these two coaches. I really hadn't considered this, that they kind of have similar backgrounds, defensive-minded guys that got marquee head coaching jobs as their first jobs and at a pretty relatively young age. And part of this quote, Kirby was talking about Marcus Freeman, quote, for him to take that over at that age, manage that and have success and really go through some tough times. I mean, it doesn't come without criticism to be a head coach, but to do it at that age at Notre Dame is pretty special. And he's obviously done a great job. He's got great presence and command about him. And I think that's what makes him a great head coach. I mean, I think the big takeaway I would have of what Kirby shared to start this week is he's got a lot of respect for Marcus Freeman, especially. I think those defensive-minded guys especially kind of understand, what they've done. It's a brotherhood,
right? It's a brotherhood.
And he knows, going back to, I think that would have been the 2021 Peach Bowl when Marcus was at Cincinnati. He's gone up against him before. But I think there's a lot of respect for this Notre Dame team. There's a lot of respect for what this Fighting Irish group has accomplished. And, Kirby understands that he's breaking in a first-time quarterback in a huge moment. Yeah. They know it's not going to be easy. And I think he's excited to see what this team's able to do against.
The respect for Kirby Smart is absolutely reciprocated. The guy's done an absolutely tremendous job. Truly came in and made Georgia a national power. But, you mentioned first-time coaches with Marcus Freeman. Notre Dame has a history of very poor results from first-time head coaches. I can go back to Jerry Faust, which is way back when he recently passed away. God rest his soul. He was the first coach that I covered full-time. He was totally overmatched for the magnitude of coaching Notre Dame. Bob Davie followed Lou Holtz. That's a losing proposition following a guy like Lou Holtz, because I will always say Lou Holtz was a football genius, and Davey couldn't handle I keep using the word magnitude, but the spotlight, the magnitude of Notre Dame, and then Charlie White, who came very cocky man, comes in from working for Belichick with the Patriots and says he's going to have a schematic advantage, and he did for 2 years because he had Brady Quinn and Jeff Samardzija and some pieces that actually Tyrone Willingham had recruited. He did, after the first 2 years, the last 3 years of Charlie Weiss wasn't very good. So what Marcus Freeman is doing at Notre Dame, like when he was hired, I had a lot of people say, you want Notre Dame to go that route again? A coach that, hasn't been a head coach, and then he starts out 0-3, and you start to say, okay, yeah, there's going to be a learning curve, but he truly has learned every step of the ways. Now he's won 15 out of 16, which doesn't sound like a lot to Georgia people. But 15 out of 16 for a guy that's really, we went into the season saying he's still learning on a job. He lost to Northern Illinois. They weren't prepared. They weren't well prepared to play that day. Northern Illinois played, not to make an excuse, but Northern Illinois played tremendous that day, and Notre Dame didn't. So at that point, you're saying, okay, it's still, here's another season that, and this was a season that was a great opportunity for Notre Dame that a lot of people back. You looked at the schedule and said, you know what, they could go 12. If they beat A&M, they could go 12-0. So they beat A&M and they're 1-1 after game 2. But he's done a great job. And I'm here to tell you that the Notre Dame side of things here, from a fan standpoint, yeah, there's concern because you're playing Georgia and Kirby Smart in the postseason. He wins.
Yeah, I give credit for the way that Notre Dame in that first year of Marcus Freeman to be where they are now. I mean, I wanted to bring back up Kirby Smart's first season at Georgia did not go as planned. They nearly lost to Nichols as like a 55-point favorite. It was something absurd. They lost at home. I believe that was homecoming to Vanderbilt. They go 8-5. I don't think people were totally like, this is a failure, this is not going to work. But it was like, that first year did not go as planned. So to bounce back like they have, and then again, as you mentioned, it could have gone sideways after losing to Northern Illinois, and they deserve a lot of credit that it did not. Now, Tim, looking at this matchup between Notre Dame, between Georgia, 8:45 p.m. Eastern time, that's going to be on ESPN on New Year's Day. What are the keys in your mind for Notre Dame? What did they have to accomplish to say by the time we get to late in this fourth quarter that they've got a chance to win this thing?
Well, when Georgia does a good job of slowing down Notre Dame's running game, which they certainly will at minimum at various points of the game, because Indiana did. So Georgia's going to do that too. That's where Riley Leonard has to remain sharp. And he has been, you want to talk about a guy that made progress. I mean, after the Northern Illinois game, he wasn't playing very well. He made a terrible decision at the end of the game when Notre Dame was leading. It was a 3rd and 1. Yeah, it was a 3rd and 1. And he threw down the middle of the field, and the pass had no chance. Notre Dame was leading by a point at that juncture. So, if it's not open, overthrow it or underthrow it and run it on 4th down, and you run the clock out and you win the game. So he's really had to grow, and he's a great kid. He's kind of a happy-go-lucky kid, and you kind of wonder, all right, how tough and how competitive is this kid? He's proven exactly how tough and how competitive he is in the last 11 games. So he's got to be able to hit the passes that are available to him. When Notre Dame can't just run the ball down the throat of Georgia, they're not going to be able to do that. So that's one key. The other key on the other side of the ball, which I mentioned right when we started talking, Jordan, was, can Notre Dame get a pass rush? Man, I don't really see how they're going to get a pass rush from their D-line without Riley Mills. Not necessarily just what Riley Mills did, but what Riley Mills creates for the people around him. So L. Golden's going to have to blitz, and those blitzes are going to have to get home. They usually do. He's very creative. He comes up with ways. He schemes them all year. Notre Dame's linebackers, and occasionally he doesn't send the 3rd level very often. Not since he had a double safety blitz against Ohio State in the 22 season opener, and it killed them. But yeah, so those are the two things. Riley Leonard has to be able to keep Georgia's defense honest by throwing the football, and I think he can. I think he's evolved to that. But, everybody still says, and I understand why they say it, if Notre Dame falls behind, can Riley Leonard lead Notre Dame back from 2 touchdowns with his arm? They haven't been in that position because they've been hammering people generally. So, I would say those two things, and probably I'm sure there's something in special teams that, as prepared as an opponent can be, Notre Dame will have a variation of it if they need that, and they probably will. This is an opponent that's big time, man, big time, bigger than anything Notre Dame has seen this year.
You got to throw the kitchen sink at it because it's one of those games, I think, really on both sides. And special teams is going to matter in this game, aside from, any shenanigans, any trick plays. Georgia's going to be breaking in a new punter. It's probably going to be Drew Miller because Brett Thorson got hurt, so that's going to be something to watch. Looking at it from Georgia's side, as far as the keys, the biggest thing to me is going to be the run game on both sides. I mean, I think that Georgia is going to do everything it can to get Trevor Etienne, get Nate Frazier. I think that Branson Robinson's got a chance to come back. I think they're as healthy as they've been at running back probably the entire season, which is a blessing this time of year because it feels like without your starting quarterback, they're going to do what they can to get that run game going. And then on the other side, I think like we've talked about in this podcast, Tim, you say, all right, let's try to make Riley Leonard beat us. Let's try to slow down Jeremiah Love and those guys. Let's try to, you're not going to stop this run game, but you got to try to contain it and try to force them to throw the ball to have a chance to slow down what I think is really good Notre Dame offense. And then it's really simple too, going back to offense. I just think turnover battle. I think that they have got to limit the turnovers, not so much because the turnover battle is the end all be all, but I think you want to try to maximize possessions. I don't think you can afford to give away possessions. I don't think you can afford to give Notre Dame short fields to make things easy. And I would even more so say probably that mattering more in that first half. Think about if Gunnar Stockton goes out on one of these, first 2-3 drives and throws a pick. Like, that's going to affect how he plays. That's just natural for a younger guy who, again, this is going to be his first start. I think if you can limit the turnovers, if you can try to, even if you're settling for field goals, I think your defense is good enough that, they probably understand what they're walking into here. This may be a low-scoring game where the defense feels like, all right, we have to bring it for our offense. We have to bring it for a first-time starter. I think that, you just want to try to get at least 3 points in some of these drives early, sustain confidence, and see what you can do from there.
I do want to say, and, when I go on like somebody else's podcast like yours, I'm going to pay total respect to Georgia. I have great respect for the program and what Kirby Smart has done. And as I said at the top of the show, these are 2 bedrock college football programs. But let me be fair to the Notre Dame side, because I know the Notre Dame people will be seeing what our conversation as well. And that is this. I mean, this is the thought process. If you're going to catch Georgia, now's the time to catch them. Not only because of the quarterback situation, but, there have been games this year. It's been a struggle along the way for Georgia. I also will acknowledge that, Notre Dame's schedule isn't anywhere close to what Georgia has played. So they've been up against it. Texas twice, Tennessee, Ole Miss, Alabama. Notre Dame has not played that type of schedule. So when I say this is Notre Dame's best chance, it's based upon Georgia having to play a whole bunch of the teams I just mentioned. Those are all really, really good teams. Alabama's probably the least of those teams this year. So I just want to say that, because I think that Notre Dame look, and I look at it like, okay, if you're going to beat Georgia, now's the time to do it. The other thing you mentioned, turnovers. Notre Dame has thrived on turnovers. Notre Dame and Indiana were in the top. Notre Dame was second. Indiana was third or fifth or whatever in turnover margin. That's not a strength for Georgia. So I think it's imperative that Notre Dame does win the turnover battle because they've done that all year, and that's what you're going to need in a game like this. I did want to ask you about, you said that the wide receiver struggling, and I haven't watched Georgia games start to finish, but I'm trying to get a cross section of all the ones that matter, and I have seen a lot of drop passes. Now Notre Dame has had Bo Collins has dropped passes. Jordan Faison has dropped passes, but he just had a really good game against Indiana. Who would be the greatest culprit? I would suspect it's Arian Smith, based upon what I've seen.
Yes, Arian Smith has struggled with drops, and it's almost fitting, Tim, that he's the leading receiver for this team because it really hasn't just been him, but he has struggled mightily with drops, so much so that I would encourage, if you got a chance, to go back and watch the SEC title game between now and when this Sugar Bowl is played. I mean, Kirk Herbstreit was perplexed by what Arian was even trying to do. I mean, there was a couple times he was sort of jumping for passes that were coming into his chest, and Kirk's just sort of like, I don't really understand. But, it's not really just been him. Dominic Lovett is a guy that I thought had a chance to be Georgia's leading receiver this year, and he struggled quite a bit with drops. Dylan Bell's had a few here and there. And that is one of those things, again, going back to the start of this episode when we talked about inconsistent run blocking. A lot of the time with this team, I've made this comparison quite a few times this year. It's almost like the kid in school that you're like, if you just applied yourself, it's like if you just applied yourself, you'd be a straight A student, but there's just like little things where, that just hold them back. And, like Kirby has said that he doesn't feel like Georgia's played a complete game yet. Well, we're 13 games into this season. That's not exactly, reason to be excited that they could do it in the Sugar Bowl.
Well, yeah. And I realized the Mississippi State game was a little sloppy, right? Didn't necessarily play really well. Probably completely disinterested in playing against UMass because it's, in the middle of all these other games. I understand. I mean, it's harder for Georgia to play a complete game with the schedule play. I did want to ask about Benjamin Jurasik because Notre Dame has a great tight end tradition too, and that was a guy I kept saying they need if he's going to leave Stanford, they need to get him to Notre Dame, and he's following the footsteps of a pretty good tight end in Georgia too. But it doesn't look like he isn't a guy that's been targeted a whole lot, or.
So it's a situation with Ben where
Delp's really good too. Yeah,
and really all these tight ends as a room, I feel like have come together in probably the last maybe month and change. I mean, it felt like the tight ends weren't that big of an option in the passing game. It just seemed like that they weren't being targeted and weren't really involved. And I think Ben Jurasik deserves a lot of credit. Tim, he looked lost in the first game, 2 games where you just thought this guy's borderline unplayable.
Wow.
He deserves a lot of credit though. He bounced back from it, and he has very steadily gotten better. And I think that he's playing really well. He had a big catch early in that SEC title game. But yeah, Jurasik is a guy that a lot of us really hyped up watching his film at Stanford, and just really struggled with blocking early in the season, had a few boneheaded penalties, pre-snap penalties, and you kind of thought, this is a room with a lot of talent at tight end.
Yeah, big shoes to fill.
Yes, and he's done a very good job when it could have been very easy to be like, look, this isn't working. But he's somebody to watch. Lawson Lucky, who had an insane toe tap grab in the SEC title game. Oscar Delp was huge. Those tight ends, I think, when we come out of this game on New Year's Day, I would not be surprised if at least one of those tight ends are top receiver, one of the top 2 or 3 receivers for Georgia. I think the tight ends will be quite involved.
Well, I know they love Delp in the red zone, and he's proven himself there. A concern for Notre Dame is the kicking situation, because Woodring just doesn't miss inside 50, right? How many in a row inside 50s he made? 30 some?
Something absurd. He's been fantastic.
Yeah. Now Mitch Jeter struggled. He had a groin injury. Struggled. They tried to rest him a couple games, put some other guys in, not successful. But Jeter hit a 49-yarder against Indiana in 20-degree weather, which was really, really. I wish you would have seen just the view from the press box looking over at the Notre Dame sideline when he hit that 49-yarder, because like it's been six. It was in the making for like 6 games, and so the entire team, from coaches to players to trainers to whatever, went berserk about him kicking that. But that's a disparity that obviously Notre Dame can't afford to, have go against them. I did want to ask you about, the Georgia secondary and what you think. Who are the strengths of that secondary?
Well, I would start with Malachi Starks, who's
Yeah.
an All-American once again. I think he's been a little more gettable this year than I
I've
think.
seen that. I have seen that. That's why I wondered, like, I looked at his accolades and I'm like, well, I didn't see that on that player, that player, that player. But I'm not seeing the whole everything.
He was a Jim Thorpe finalist, and I kind of feel like that was sort of a legacy, finalist. But he's still really good. But I think I would watch pre-snap eye discipline. There's been a few times that motion and RPOs, he's bitten and gotten burnt on some of those. Mm-hmm. Dalen Everett, I think, has done a very good job of getting better as the season goes. Starting corner, a guy that started for the first time last year, has done a really good job, especially that they have changed who was the starting corner opposite of him, and it was Julian Humphrey for the majority of the year. He gets a DPI on the first drive against Tennessee. Daniel Harris comes in, and Julian Humphrey never comes back. Julian has since transferred to Texas A&M.
Oh, wow.
So Dalen's done a good job. They've had to kind of plug and play at the star position, which is nickelback for Georgia. Mostly been Janelle Aguero, a sophomore, first-time starter. He had dealt with a hand injury for a little bit. I think that was in the Ole Miss game. He got hurt, but he's been playing really well. I need to give a shout-out to the other safeties, Dan Jackson. This is a guy that's a super senior that I didn't really anticipate, if he did come back for this year, that he would really play all that much. He's been fantastic. He's done a great job.
Big-time hitter.
Yeah, I mean, essentially won them the Georgia Tech game, or at least helped them get back in it by forcing a fumble right before the 2-minute timeout. He's been outstanding, and like you said, a big hitter.
I got to tell you, Jordan, I was in a restaurant in Los Angeles. It was the night before Notre Dame played USC, and somebody had the Georgia Tech game on their phone at our table, and we, of course, were rooting against Georgia because we thought that would eliminate them from the playoff situation. And that had to be incredible to experience that.
It's one of those things where with this team, we did a superlatives episode for, I think it was the day before Christmas Eve. And we wanted a word for this season to this point. And I think agonizing was one of the ones thrown out, because it's like they continue to find. I compared it to like an escape artist that's got like their hands like handcuffed behind their back, and you throw them in like a thing of water, and you're just like, there's no way they can find a way. And they've played so poorly at times. There's things that they've wanted to clean up, but like they're just resilient. I don't know how they do it. And that Dan Jackson play, I thought, was a great example of that. I wanted to shout out KJ Bolden as well, a guy they flipped late from Florida State, and he's played quite a bit at safety. He's done a great job as a freshman.
He's a true freshman, right? Is he a true freshman? Yeah,
he is. So yeah, he's done a great job as well. Tim, looking to this game, how do you see this thing playing out in the Superdome? And if you want to give a score prediction, you can. If not, I know a lot of folks like to save that, but wanted to see how you think this thing will play out.
Yeah, I do bad enough job when I wait till like the day before to pick it, so I'm going to hold off on that. I do. You mentioned something about being low scoring. I tend to agree with that. I just think two heavyweights slugging it out. It's going to be, what's the over under?
Let's see. I haven't looked at it. Looks like 44.5 at time
that's
of recording.
Low. That's low, and so that'll be challenging to keep it under that. I think that's good for Notre Dame. If that's an accurate number to set it at. Notre Dame. I think I keep coming back to the same thing that. Notre Dame's defense has to be great. I expect it to be, even without Riley Mills, because that's what they do. And then offensively, I think everybody at Notre Dame's confident that Riley Leonard is ready for the moment. But as I said before, Notre Dame hasn't trailed, substantially. Even in their one loss, they weren't trailing, substantially. So I think it's a slugfest. I think it's I love the matchup. I'm really excited to see Notre Dame match up against Georgia because it's time for Notre Dame to really put their big boy pants on and come up with a win like this. 1993. It really sticks in the craw of Notre Dame fans that they haven't won a big post regular season game of this magnitude. So you look at the point spread on this. Notre Dame opened as a 1.5, and it's 2.5. I think that tells you this is a pretty evenly matched game. And this, if not now against Georgia, when is Notre Dame going to do it?
Tim, I don't want to date you here, but what's the reaction when I tell you I was not alive for the last time Notre Dame won a postseason game of that magnitude?
When Teo was
well, I'm talking about 93. I said I was not alive for that.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't understand you. 93. Oh my God, one of the most memorable, 2005 USC. It's right up there. The build up for that number 1, number 2 Florida State game. I remember, that was back in the day when we had press conferences every day. They don't do that now. They shut you off. You don't talk to the players. After Tuesday with us. I'm not sure what it is for you guys, but I can remember Lou Holtz. Lou Holtz on Thursday night would have parties at his house, and it would be, he would have practice and stuff, and he would invite famous people, Notre Dame people, and I was invited to that one. I don't know how that happened, but I was invited to that one. I looked across the room and. Do you know who Regis Philbin is? Do you remember Regis Philbin?
Of course.
He's a Notre Dame graduate, of course. And there was Regis Philbin, and I had a conversation with him. I didn't expect it to be that way, but it's just the magnitude of the buildup of that weekend and that throughout the week and that night. And there was a feeling like Notre Dame felt like we are going to win this game. I felt that way. And Florida State was absolutely tremendous. Charlie Ward but yeah, that was tremendous. Of course, a week later they had a devastating loss to Boston College. Tom Coughlin, by the way, was the head coach of that Boston College team the year before. It was a fluke of nature. They played Boston College back-to-back years at Notre Dame, and in '92. Notre Dame hammered BC 54 to whatever, and Tom Coughlin remembered that, and he had his Boston College team ready. And Notre Dame, they couldn't hit their emotional mark after what happened the week before. Just a devastating loss. But 93 Notre Dame, Florida State, incredible.
I looked it up because I thought this was the case. Mark Richt was the quarterback coach for that Florida State team in '93. So wanted to bring it back to Georgia there. Wanted to get through our score predictions at Dawgs247. I've got Georgia 20-17. Again, I think it's going to be a pretty low-scoring game. I think they're going to let Trevor Etienne and those guys go out there and run hard and try to take as much off of Gunnar Stockton. I think it's going to be a tough game. I think it's going to be one decided at the buzzer. Georgia wins it on a field goal. Other scores, Benjamin Wolk has Georgia 27-17 over Notre Dame, and Kip Adams has Georgia 28-21, with the note that Trevor Etienne runs wild. I do think that Trevor's going to be one of the key players in this game. He's going to be somebody to watch. Tim, I appreciate the time. I've enjoyed talking to you, getting ready for this game. I want to give you an opportunity. One, if you had any other questions, by all means, let me know. But two, to plug what you guys have going on at Irish Illustrated, getting ready for this big game on New Year's Day.
Yeah, I think I've thrown enough questions at you for the day, Jordan. When I see you in the press box, I'll ask you a few more during the week for a press conference. But irishillustrated.com. I've been doing this 43 years, but I've been a part of Irish Illustrated since 2005. We feel really good about what we're doing. I think we have one of the largest staffs among sites like ours. And if that means I make a little less money, so be it. Because I just think it's important that I finish off my career doing this the right way. And so we've got a great staff. Tim O'Malley, I'm not going to mention everybody, but Tim O'Malley's my right-hand guy, and We actually came from the same high school. He's quite a bit. Same high school. We both are Notre Dame graduates. He's quite a bit younger than I am, but we've been a team for a while, and just a tremendous reporter and passionate about what he does, which matches how I felt about this. I've done it for more than 4 decades, and I'm getting worn out, but I am still very passionate about what we do, and I think that our coverage, our podcasts are going really, really well, and I think that our passion, our entire staff, Drew Mentag, John Bryce, who works for Football Scoop, Kevin Sinclair, a bunch of us guys, we're pretty passionate about what we do, and I'm sure you are too, Jordan. And it's if you have any inclination to follow Notre Dame football, we confidently believe that we put out the best product there at IrishIllustrated.com.
I would totally agree. I was reading a lot of y'all's coverage, getting ready for the Indiana game. You guys do a fantastic job. Excited to see you guys in New Orleans and also follow what you guys are writing in the lead up to this game. For the folks not familiar with us, Dawgs247, the Junkyard Dawgcast podcast. I'm Jordan Hill. We got Benjamin Wolk, Kip Adams. Ben will be with me down there in New Orleans, getting excited for this opportunity to go cover this game and see how this thing plays out. Well, again, Tim, I appreciate the time. I want to thank everyone who watched or listened to this to check out both of our podcasts. A lot going on, a lot of good content as we get ready. 2025 is going to be here before you know it, and we'll have a big game to kick things off. So we'll wrap up the episode right there. For Tim Priester, I'm Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care, everybody.